Lesley Findlay here for vocaltechnique.ca. My work and my website is dedicated to developing excellent singers in every vocal style. In this video, I want to talk about the diaphragm. The diaphragm is an unusual muscle in the body, and that's why a lot of people don't really understand how it functions. It has unusual attachments and it works in a very unique way compared to other muscles of the body. It's not really studied by singers for the most part. If you pick up a textbook on singing, you might find a chapter on breathing. But it's a bit dry, a bit unapproachable, so what I want to give you here is just the essentials. The diaphragm is like an inverted bowl and it forms a dome shape. It transects the body between the chest and the abdominal area, so the only things above the diaphragm are the lungs and the heart. The heart is nestled between the right and left lobes of the lungs, and it's offset slightly to the left. The shape of the diaphragm in the front is a very pronounced V shape because it attaches at the bottom of the sternum. So palpate along the lower rib cage, down that V formation, and as you work your way outwards and to the sides, you might notice a bone that feels a little different than the other ones. You might feel a little tip on it, or that it's slightly detached from the other ribs that come before it. That is your first floating rib. And as you continue to work outwards towards the side, you're going to find another little tip. That's your second floating rib. The diaphragm then continues around to the back, to the spine, and there are ligaments that attach deep in the spine to what we call the lower lumbar, which is L1, 2, and 3. These are very deep attachments. And it's because of these attachments that I discovered something very special about the diaphragm, which is the ability to really use the full capacity of the diaphragm depends on the position of the lower back. The best position for breathing is a fetal position. Everybody knows this, but how do we take advantage of this as a singer? Well, first of all, I train my singers to release the lower part of the back and to get a deep breath. We work on breathing outside of singing so that you can truly deepen your breath and really feel what it is to get a low, deep, preferably relaxed breath. But as the diaphragm lowers and you breathe in, of course, it's contracting. So there is a tension involved in that contraction. So we have to understand where the tension lies or where that contraction happens and what parts need to remain relaxed. So the diaphragm is, it's not really circular in shape, it's more, it follows the shape of our body. So it's wider than it is deep. From front to back, of course, is a narrower measurement on our bodies than it is from side to side in the diaphragm. And as you can imagine, the front fibers of the diaphragm are much shorter than the back fibers of the diaphragm, because the front fibers are only attaching from the meniscus to the top of the rib cage or the sternum area, and the back fibers of the diaphragm are attaching from the meniscus all the way down to L1 and 2. So these are much longer fibers. And this is probably why that classical singers discovered in the Italian school that back breathing is really the best type of singing breath. And it's not unusual that they would call it back breathing because those are the powerful fibers that really allowed you to get the deepest breath. And it does have to do with the position of the lower back. I believe that this is something I stumbled upon. It's not something I read in any book, but breathing, I believe, is one of my strengths. And when I teach my singers how to breathe, they're often, rediscovering what it is to breathe really, really deeply for the first time. The diaphragm is a very unusual muscle in the body, not because of its shape and placement, although that's quite unusual, but also because it's not paired. Most of the muscles of the body are paired, like biceps and triceps. So when you're working with a bicep, the tricep is working in opposition and vice versa. The diaphragm has no pair. The diaphragm is a muscle of inspiration, which is to say, not that it gives you great ideas, but it's what makes you breathe in. So the diaphragm, as you start to sing, as you start to speak, as you start to breathe out, of course has no function. You cannot sing from your diaphragm when you cannot pull your diaphragm when you're singing, and these are terms that we often hear coming from voice teachers and students. The diaphragm, as you start to sing, is actually relaxing, so the control of the breath has to transfer to another set of muscles, and those muscles are the intercostals. We're not going to go into that right now because this is a video just on the diaphragm. So your diaphragm does the breath in, and after that it starts to release incrementally and relax. So when you're singing, the diaphragm is passively moving back to its original position, which is up as a dome. It took me a while to get my head around this because your diaphragm, when relaxed, is counter to gravity. When your diaphragm is relaxed, it's up and it's in a dome shape, and when it contracts, it flattens and it's still in a dome, but it's slightly compressed or flattened. The diaphragm, when it contracts, actually goes through sort of two stages. The diaphragm first contracts down and it's compressing everything below it. So the only things above the diaphragm are the lungs and the heart. Everything below, like you have your stomach, you have your liver, you have your kidneys, gallbladder, you have all of your intestines, all of that is below the diaphragm. So when the diaphragm contracts down, it's compressing everything below it. When it can no longer compress, the top of the diaphragm, or the meniscus, becomes a pivot point, and it starts to rotate the rib cage upward. So as a singer, you want to maximize the upward rotation of the rib cage because that's what's going to give you the most breath. So in classical music, we understand that back breathing is the most powerful type of breath. And it's because of these lower attachments of the ligaments to L1 and 2 that back breathing became the predominant desirable type of breath for a singer. Classical singers realized that the movement of the back is what gave the power to the voice. So we use this area of the diaphragm most naturally when we're in a fetal position. When we're in a fetal position, the knees are pulled up, the lower back is released, and with that release comes the release of the back of the diaphragm. Babies really have the best breath. In the womb, they are in the fetal position, and when they're born, they don't have the muscle development to close off that lower breathing area. So they often have this wonderful movement in their back when they breathe. A lot of babies sleep in a position with their knees pulled up, often on their stomachs with the knees pulled up, which releases the lower back, and you're going to see a tremendous amount of movement in the lower back. As singers, we want to study that breath and get back to it because it really is the best and most powerful type of breath. Power in the voice does come from back breathing. That's well known in the Italian schools. And it works for classical singers just as well as it does for every other type of singer. So I give specific breathing exercises to my students to develop that lower, relaxed breath. It's not that difficult to attain, but you do have to follow specific exercises to get you back to where you were when you were breathing as a child. I go into this in considerable detail with my students so that they understand. I check their breath, I monitor their breath, I tell them what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what they need to work towards. When you're working on your breath, you want to make sure that the breath doesn't come more than halfway up your torso, because if it starts creeping into the upper torso with a high, tight breath, you're going to find that the throat also tightens. So that's something we want to avoid as singers. So I've heard a lot of people who think that they need to release the belly and relax all the stomach muscles in order to breathe properly, but that's actually not true. When you breathe in, the diaphragm is compressing everything below it. But we actually want to shorten that stage of the breath, and we want to maximize the rotational stage of the breath. So for that to happen, we need to have a certain tone. I wouldn't say tightness in the belly, but there needs to be a certain tone. And we achieve that by strengthening the lower transverse. The lower transverse is an abdominal muscle which is located quite low in the body, and we simply do that by a little bit of a pelvic tilt. This gives all the tone that we need to the lower abdominal area and allows the diaphragm to be maximized. We also need to strengthen the external intercostal muscles in order to maintain the expansion achieved by the diaphragm. And as we start to sing, the contraction of the diaphragm, the control transfers to the external intercostals, and that's something we call support. As you can see, all of the subjects related to singing are quite interrelated, so I can't just talk about the diaphragm and not mention these other things. This is not a video about breathing, this is only a video about the diaphragm, so maybe from this one you'd like to hop over to the one on breathing, and that will maybe give you a fuller insight into how the diaphragm works. I am making a short video on each of these subjects, so if you poke around the website and find the intercostals and support, you're going to find that all of these videos are quite related and each benefits the other. So thanks for watching. I hope that helps a bit. This is Lesley Findlay signing out for vocaltechnique.ca. Bye.